Do kids still knock on doors to see if somebody wants to come out and play?
So I think this is a really interesting question. And if you go back and watch the original creators, like full question, it's like, are we texting first before letting our kids go over to other people's houses to ask if their kids want to play, or are we knocking on doors first? And I would say, like, based on my experience, that it is very dependent, not just of where you live, but also possibly of the neighborhood that you live in and things like that. So we used to live in California. And when we lived in California, absolutely not. My kids would not go knock on anyone else's doors. Even if they knew somebody in the neighborhood or down the street from us, we would text first. And even then, our kids typically didn't play outside with other kids. They would play at someone else's house or at our house. But we also didn't live in like a super great neighborhood. So that definitely did play a part of it. Um, then, but I also had friends who lived in other neighborhoods who their kids would absolutely go and knock on people's doors and be like, hey, can so and so come out and play, whatever. Moving here to Maryland, when we first moved here, my kids didn't know anybody in the neighborhood and they desperately wanted to make friends. And we would see, like, bikes or scooters being left in people's yards. And so we were like, okay, there are kids that live in this neighborhood and it is a safe neighborhood for people to play in. It's a very big neighborhood, but it's also very secluded. Like, there are no through streets or anything like that. So there's not like people driving recklessly through the neighborhood, things like that. But we told the kids, like, no, you don't know anyone here, so you can't just go knock on their door and be like, hey, I see that you're a child who's my age. Would you like to come play with me? But we told them, like, if you see other kids outside playing, then you can go and ask if they want to play with you. But for the first year or so that we lived here, we did not see a single kid outside playing, like the entire time. It was absolutely wild. We're like, this is a big neighborhood. There are tons of kids who live in this neighborhood, clearly based on the number of bikes and scooters, skateboards, things left out in front yards, but we don't actually see these children. And we homeschooled, so we were home all day, every day, like when they weren't at their own activities. And we just weren't seeing them. However, my kids started public school back in October of last year. And since then, they have made friends with kids at the school who also live in our neighborhood because the school serves the neighborhood. And now there are a ton more kids who are outside playing. Now their friends at school are coming and knocking on the door and saying, hey, can your kids come out and play? My kids are saying, hey, can I go over to so-and-so's house and ask if they want to play? However, I know that part of this question has to do with like boundaries and like, how do we say no, or like, are we comfortable with how other people say no? So we have come up with a rule. And this is how I grew up. Like, this is a rule that was in my house. So we just kind of like transferred it because it made a lot of sense to us. If you go to somebody's house and ask them to play, you are not asking to play at their house. You are asking them to either come outside to play with you or asking for them to come to your house to play. And that way, the adults, the family, has the ability to opt in or out of somebody being in their space ahead of time. So if one of my kids wants to play with a friend, I have the ability to say ahead of time, hey, I don't want any other kids in my house right now. I'm feeling tired. I'm working on chores, whatever's going on. And I say no ahead of time. So if my child still wants to play with somebody, cool. If you want to go play with them, you have to ask them if they want to play outside. And I'm also extending that same courtesy to their family by saying, do not invite yourself over to somebody else's house. So that means when their friends come over and knock on my door, even if, sometimes the answer is no. Hey, they're doing homework still. Hey, we're just about to sit down and eat, whatever it is. I have the option to say no and not feel guilty because that child is not asking to come into my house. That child is asking, will your kid come out and play with me, or will your kid come back to my house to play with me? And I think that was very important for me because when kids all of a sudden started knocking on my door, I swear last week we had 4 separate knocks on the door within like an hour and a half from kids in the neighborhood coming to our house to ask if the kids could come out and play. And so for me, that was like a really big, like, okay, this makes me feel better about it if I know that like they're asking if my kids can go outside and play. They're not asking to just come into my house when I'm, in my pajamas, or like I'm having, whatever, a lazy morning on a Saturday. I don't have to feel like I need to host children when I was unprepared to do so. So I think that was a way that we kind of reached a compromise kind of where like my kids still have the autonomy to be like, hey, I'm going to go ask so-and-so to play. But all of the parents still felt comfortable being like, nope, you can't come in my house right now, but you guys can go outside to play, or you can go back to your house to play. And then the other half of that is like, if one of their friends comes over and I am okay with them staying here, then I can say like, so-and-so comes over, says, hey, can your kid come out to play? I can say, yeah, do you guys want to play here? Do you want to go out to play? Or are you going back to your house? And then they can discuss and figure out what they're doing. And so that still gives them a level of control of where they're going to be playing and what they're going to be doing. So those are my thoughts. Hopefully that helps. And I do think that it is, very dependent on where you're at, whether it's the neighborhood or the town or like whatever the culture is where you're at of how those decisions are made. And also like if the kid comes over and says, hey, do you want to play? And I do say, hey, do you want to stay at my house? And they decide to stay at my house, I will send a text to the parent and be like, hey, so-and-so is going to be staying here at our house. Like they decided they're going to play here for a bit. So like, I'll let you know when they're on their way home or whatever. But yeah, anyway, hope that helps.